Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. My name is Tim Hannon, and I am joined by
Steve Wirt.
Steve Wirt. For this episode, we comb through the archives of the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast to dig up some Pittsburgh sports feuds from over the years. And we're calling this episode Famous Feuds because, alliteration.
Alliteration in that.
But we also wanted to share some feuds that maybe you didn't know a whole lot about.
Will Sean Rodriguez and the Gatorade bucket be?
That would
That
have been a
could be.
good feud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they've since made amends. So, that's good.
Yeah.
But no, we left that one off, unfortunately. Steve, you and I have been friends for a lot of years. Have we ever had a feud?
Sure. I don't know. Not that I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nothing groundbreaking. I mean,
We're feuding. We're feuding like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Yeah.
there was
I
that
mean,
time that you killed Apollo Creed in the ring and I had to come fight you in the Soviet Union.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
oh
it.
wait, that was Rocky
Yeah.
Four. Okay. Well, let's talk about the Pittsburgh sports feuds. The first feud on our list is the one between Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw and Steelers head coach Chuck Noll. We did an episode called Biggest Personalities in Pittsburgh Sports History. And by the way, we will link all of these episodes that we're referring to in the show notes. But we did that episode and we talked about Terry and his relationship with Noel. And I think this one's pretty well documented, Steve, and well known by the fans, right? I think there's been much made about that over the years.
Well, with Terry not visiting Pittsburgh for years, and then we kind of made up, and then I don't know if he's back to not liking Pittsburgh again, or
Yeah,
it's on again, off again.
it is. One angle that I don't think gets as much attention is how Bradshaw has kind of shifted his position a lot over the years, and we talked about that here.
Bradshaw often contradicts himself. He was diagnosed years ago with clinical depression and anxiety, and to his credit, he's been very public about that, which is a courageous thing because it gets other people to then be open about it. But he just contradicts himself often, and one good example of that is his relationship with Chuck Noll, which a lot has been made about over the years. So in 2003, he was at a banquet where Noll was present, and he actually apologizes and blames all the issues on himself. He says, quote, "People say we had trouble. I created that. I wasn't as much mad at you, Chuck, as I was mad at me." So in 2003, when he's talking about the relationship with Noel, he's kind of pinning it all on himself. And Chuck was just trying to coach me and I was immature and blah, blah, blah. And then in 2020, he gives an interview about it and he says, quote, "Chuck did not know how to handle me. The way he talked to me, just God, nobody talks to their starting quarterback like that." And he just goes on and on about how Chuck Noll berated him and all he ever wanted was a hug. And so it's like which is it, Terry? Like, was it your fault? His fault? Was a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I mean, Bradshaw just that's why again we did that episode where we played the clip where he was critical of Tomlin, and I like Terry Bradshaw and he's real entertaining, but his opinions are so irrelevant to me because they're all over the map.
Yeah, he lacks consistency. I would definitely. You can tell that just from that. I forgot about that quote actually, and I don't know. Like if he just like you wonder if he forgets what he said, or it's just he's so off the cuff. He's not thinking about what he said like 5 minutes ago. He's just living in the kind of the moment there. So
I,
I
I
don't know. Maybe his opinion changed. I don't know.
no, I think you're spot on, Steve. I think he's absolutely off the cuff, living in the moment, not trying to craft like a message. Like he's not a politician. He's not trying to craft a consistent message. He's just speaking what he feels at that moment. And that's fine. Again, that's why it's one of the things that made him popular. It's one of the reasons. I mean, a lot of guys that retired in 1983 are not still world famous or well known today, and Terry Bradshaw is because his personality kind of enabled him to be in the limelight long after football.
They definitely don't. I mean, even Roger Staubach or like Tony Dorsett or like, I'm trying to think of other big players from that. Even Joe Montana, like, you don't see him on in TV or is in TV shows as much as, Chuck Noll and all that. So, or not Chuck Noll. I mean, Terry, my bad.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Chuck Noll did not have. Chuck Noll
Chuck
was not
Noll
on TV for
Chuck
years
Noll
after he
would
retired.
never be on a reality show with his wife and kids. Ever. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
Terry Bradshaw, definitely a divisive Steelers quarterback with the fan base. Like you mentioned, Steve, the on again, off again. A guy who was maybe even more divisive in terms of what the fans thought of him, and in fact had an ongoing feud with the fan base, was a guy that wore number 10 in the 90s. Remember him?
Oh, yes, Cordell.
Steve, you did an entire episode about him, and we talked about when the fans really turn on him.
And I would say this, another reason maybe, racism, was people and rumors, like Cordell's, there was always rumors about his sexuality. Was that just like stealth racism? You didn't want to sound like a racist, so you would say, oh, he's, whatever, the people would call him gay. And it was always, oh, my second brother's cousin saw him do this or that. And it was always like stupid rumors.
Well, and it's hard, and you have it in the notes here. Like, it's tough to read people's minds. Like, you don't know where their motivation's always coming from. But some of the stuff that was directed at Cordell was just so vicious and angry, and I don't know. We were too young to remember the anger that was directed at Bradshaw. But a lot of people really hated Bradshaw, too, for a while.
Well, people didn't like O'Donnell, but it was never to that level. It was just like, oh, he threw those interceptions. Which I can understand. It's a fan. And,
Yeah. Well,
and I think that's more of a fair criticism than this. This is just like, somebody just made this up.
And O'Donnell
literally, somebody just made this up.
And O'Donnell's career arc with the Steelers wasn't the same as any of those other guys. Like, O'Donnell sort of like was a game manager, and then he like progressively got better every season until he threw those interceptions in the Super Bowl. Then he didn't stick around long enough to. Yeah. He left after that. So I don't know if there was a whole arc there. I mean, Ben's had a couple ups and downs in his career, and there's been viciousness thrown his way. But boy, Cordell.
Well, I think Ben's though, like, it isn't like stuff people made stuff out of Hulk. Although I've heard like weird rumors about Ben too. Like,
yeah, but the Cordell thing was much more prominent, and like you said, everybody was sure because they had a source inside the.
Whereas like Ben, it's like you can't Ben, like the couple incidences, there's been some couple well-publicized incidents. Then there's been some other rumored incidents, right. But it's like, well, if these other incidents, and that definitely happened, could have this, I don't know.
The rumors about his sexuality seemed to start when he cried on the sidelines.
Yes.
Which seemed like almost too convenient. Like, well, he's crying on the sidelines, so that means he's not a real man. Or who knows where that came from. But it is hard to ignore race when you think about just like I said, the viciousness of some of the things that were said about him. And like you said, who knows what people are really thinking. But boy, it's hard to not at least factor that in.
And Bill Cowher went through it too. Cordell wasn't the only person that this was directed at. Kay Cowher, his late wife, actually addressed it. Here's an ironic thing. In October 2017, Cordell actually won a $3 million default judgment in Atlanta against a YouTuber. I guess it was some guy on the internet named Andre Caldwell who claimed he had sexual encounter with Stewart, and Stewart had given him expensive gifts. Stewart denied these claims. Caldwell later recanted the claim and denied that it had ever happened. And Cordell actually got a judgment against this guy for $3 million in court. So, I mean, so it just, I don't know why it just keeps dogging him like this. And, like, people just making it up, obviously. And it literally lost a court case. You've lost $3 million over this. I hope it was worth getting your 5 minutes of fame on YouTube.
Yeah.
And that was after 2017. He hadn't played football in 5 years.
Like, you're not even. Who would even care at that point? I don't know. It was just, you're right. It was a lot of anger. People were angry at Cowher. Then there was people that said Cowher had an affair
with the secretary, and that's what the Kay Cowher quotes are about.
Well, I had also, the other rumor was that Cowher was sleeping with Cordell's sister or something. That's why
I never heard that.
That's why he kept starting him, was because.
Oh, geez.
Again, so many ridiculous rumors, but It only took one season. Like usually you'd think it would take a whole bunch of bad seasons. He was in the AFC Championship game in '97, and by like the next calendar year, he was have like in all these terrible off the field situations and hated. I mean, the town really turned on him quick.
Yeah, which was unfortunate.
It was.
And it wasn't over just like play on the field either. It was just like these stupid little, like just made up rumors. That's unfair. That's unfair to him. It was unfair to him. It really was.
And like you said, there was other things happening with the team at that time. I think people got so used to the early success of the Cowher teams and expected to be in the playoffs every year. And it wasn't just Cordell. It was a lot of other things happening with the front office and everything else that you mentioned. So it wasn't all his fault. Certainly, it was a bunch of his fault, but it wasn't all his fault.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I think I kind of compare Cordell to like Tim Tebow. He's like a decent quarterback in a certain type of offense, but he just wasn't like a good enough at that position to really carry you to a championship.
Probably the oldest feud we covered was the one between Donnie Bush and Kiki Kyler. Steve, remember Donnie Bush?
Oh, for sure. And I used to go to those games back in 1924.
Yeah, those were good ones, man. That was when baseball was baseball.
Men were men and women were women, and Honest Wagner was dating a 20-year-old.
That feud came from an episode we did called The Three Lost Rings. We did an episode about the best Steeler team, the best Penguin team, and the best Pirate teams who failed to win a championship. And the Pirates team we talked about was the 1927 club, who actually ends up having a lot of internal drama going on, especially between those two guys. And it ultimately led to disaster. No one's really sure what to expect from the Pirates. They do have a new manager since they had fired McKechnie. It's a guy named Donnie Bush, which I feel like is a great Pittsburgh name.
Donnie Bush is going to get them Pirates playing right.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys know who the new manager is, Donnie Bush. So just like the 76 Steelers with the Bradshaw injury, just like the 93 Penguins with Mario's cancer diagnosis, the 1927 Pirates experienced some heavy adversity also. Unfortunately, unlike those other two teams, this adversity is very much self-inflicted. So, as we mentioned, Donnie Bush is the manager, and he has a feud with Pirate star Kiki Kyler. Kyler's unhappy about being switched from third to second in the batting order, and allegedly he doesn't play very hard for a few games to protest. And then there's a game against the Giants where he doesn't slide into second base on a double play ball to try to break up the double play. And Bush fines him $50, which I think was probably a lot in 1927.
$50. What's that ranked for inflation? I don't know.
It's more than $50 today, I can tell you that. Donnie Bush basically benches Kiki Kyler for the last 2 months of the regular season.
What the heck?
And this does not go over well with the fans. Kyler was a World Series hero, and the fans are coming to Forbes Field literally chanting for Kyler to be put in the game. Bush tries to explain his decision in the media. He says, "Oh, there's nothing personal against Kyler. He's just not playing up to standards," and blah blah blah. But that's a little bit of horse manure because Kyler was
he felt his war was slipping.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right.
Donnie Bush was in the stats.
Kyler was hitting 309 at the time.
Well, he doesn't believe in batting average.
Right.
He's all about the OBS. And
the other thing is the guys that he's being replaced with are basically like minor league call-ups. So this sounds like he's saying it's not personal, but it sounds personal. And in fact, years later, Donnie Bush gives an interview where he finally admits that it was. He says what happened is that he used to always argue with Kiki Kyler about throwing too high for the cutoff man. And one day, Kyler's coming in to the bench, and Bush says to him, "Won't you ever learn to throw the ball?" And Kyler says, "You know what? If you don't like the way I play, then get somebody else." And Bush says, "Okay, I will." And that's literally what happens. He's like, "Okay, I will." And then to prove a point, he benches him for 2 months, the last 2 months of the season.
Instead of just like a game or two or a series,
Right.
No. Literally, August and September.
Here's Donnie Bush years later, quote, "It had to be that way. I had to maintain discipline. The real reason I benched him was for what he said to me after the high throw. I had great respect for Kyler as a player. If he had apologized to me, I would have put him back in the lineup, but he never did." End quote.
Geez.
So that's some pretty impressive stubbornness, right?
2 months.
Yeah, that's holding a grudge. I think the other interesting thing, Steve, is that 100 years ago, fans took the side of the player, whereas I feel like that would be reversed today.
You think? I don't know.
Think about like Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
When was the last time anyone ever sided with a diva player? Probably 1927. Is the answer to that question.
27, 90
I mean, seriously.
What is it, 90, 95 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, Kiki Kyler was diva.
I don't know if he was a diva. I mean,
but he's intentionally
for that era, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's potentially like taking plays off to protest. He's basically being a smart mouth to his coach. Like, oh, you don't like it, go get somebody else, right? So, that for that era, that's kind of diva-ish, and I feel like again, if that were today, bench him. We don't need that. They're bringing the team cancer and everything else. So, but at that point, the fans were mad at the manager, not at Kiki Kyler. So even without Kiki Kyler, the Pirates do battle their way past New York and St. Louis. They win the pennant. Their opponent in the World Series that year is the New York Yankees, who happen to be arguably the greatest baseball team of all time.
Yeah.
Game 1 of the World Series is at Pittsburgh, and the Yankees score a bunch of runs early. The Pirates battle back. In the bottom of the 9th inning, the Yankees are clinging to a 5-4 lead, and the pitcher spot is due up. So Donnie Bush needs to send out a pinch hitter. Guess who's on the bench, Steve?
Kiki Kyler.
It's Hall of Fame World Series hero Kiki Kyler. But instead, Donnie Bush sends up a guy named Fred Brickle, a reserve outfielder who only had 21 at bats during the whole season, and he grounds out to the pitcher, and the Pirates lose.
That's insane.
Yeah, the fans cannot believe that Donnie Bush would basically sacrifice a chance to win the first game of the World Series because he's mad at Kiki Kyler. 1927 Twitter lights up with Fire Bush hashtags.
Yeah.
Right?
The ticker on the little thing.
Well, I mean,
the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is saying, my gosh, the comments section in the Pittsburgh Post.
Right.
Really,
the comments section.
Maybe it was an editorial.
Letters to the editor.
Yeah, I guess.
Dear sir, I am highly offended by the actions of our manager. But seriously, I mean, they needed, it's 5-4. All they need is a run to tie the game, and you
put your best player out there, or like one of your best players.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, really impressive level of pettiness and stubbornness and grudge holding on the part of Donnie Bush.
Yeah.
The issue is so bad. So the owner of the team at that point is Barney Dreyfuss, who we've talked about before, and Barney Dreyfuss even has to issue a statement because there's so much furor about this. But it's kind of a weak statement, Steve. Here's what he says, quote, "It is solely an issue between Bush and Kyler. If Bush wants to play Kyler at any time, he is free to do so."
Well, what the heck does that mean? He is free to do so. Like, it's his team. He's got to,
Yeah, washing his hands of it. I mean, you're the owner, right? So I thought that was kind of weird. Barney Dreyfuss did a lot of great things, but I thought that statement was kind of weak.
Maybe he handled it behind closed doors, or maybe not.
Well, let's see what happens.
For a guy that let Fred Clark sit in the dugout, I don't know.
True. Yeah. The issue does come up again in game 2 at Forbes Field. In the 8th inning of that game, the Yankees are winning big, but the Pirates are trying to stage a comeback. And again, the Pirates need a pinch hitter. And here's the New York Times recap of that game. I'm just going to read a quote from the New York Times, and I'm going to try to read it in 1927 journalistic.
Thanks.
Quote, okay. "The fans rose by the thousands and set up a deafening clamor for Kiki Kyler, but Donnie Bush was obdurate and called on Earl Smith amid a storm of boos and jeers and catcalls. Instead, citizens jumped up and waved their fists in Bush's direction when Smith grounded weakly to Lou Gehrig. Another chorus of derisive jeers and laughter greeted the failure of Kyler's substitute." New York Times.
Wow, that sounded like something from what's his name?
Ken Burns.
Yeah, Ken
That's
Burns.
what I was going for.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a compliment. So,
Yeah.
so again, not going to play Kiki Kyler, going to put up some bum, and everybody's not happy. The Pirates dropped the first two games at home. The Yankees blow them out in game 3 in New York. So now the Pirates have their backs to the wall in game 4. They play a good game. The Wayner brothers are hitting well, and the game is tied going into the bottom of the 9th inning. But the Yankees get the first 2 men on base, and guess who's up at the plate? It's Babe freaking Ruth with the series on the line. So you don't want to pitch to him. The Pirates intentionally walk him, which means now Pirates pitcher Johnny Milges has the bases loaded with nobody out, and Lou Gehrig is up at the plate.
Well, that was like, what do they call that?
Pick your poison.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, all Lou Gehrig has to do here is hit a fly ball to the outfield, and that's the end of the series. But Johnny Milges strikes out Lou Gehrig. Then he strikes out a second Murderers Row guy, Bob Musial. And now Tony Lazzeri is up, and the Pirates are about to get out of this huge jam to save their season when Johnny Milges throws a wild pitch. The runner from third scores, and that's how the season ends.
It's kind of anticlimactic.
When you think of feuds and people being angry and fighting with each other, would Troy Polamalu be like the absolute last guy you would think of, Steve?
Probably, yeah. It would be pretty tough to have a feud with Troy Polamalu. It'd be like, okay, man, you're cool, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, Troy, pretty easygoing. Well, Troy did get into it with one Steeler teammate, and we talked about that in our messy exits episode that we did, documenting the guys who left Pittsburgh on bad terms. So, who is that guy? Who's the guy that could make even Troy Polamalu angry? We talked about it here.
So now the next group of Steeler messy exits will be Mike Tomlin headaches. So I think we all can know. We won't hold this one out any longer, because who do you think will be number one on this list, Tim?
Some guy that wore number 84, probably.
Yes. I mean, I realize there's kind of like a 1A and a 1B in this situation there for sure.
Yeah, I think the 1A is tops of the list, and the one and number 84. I mean, there are like multiple cities sports memory podcasts that could put him on the same list.
Well, let's go through it, Tim. Here, but let's break it down. If you have a guess, this is one Antonio Brown. He was selected in the 6th round. He was actually the 22nd out of 27 wide receivers that were picked in the whole draft. So it was towards the bottom. Gee, I wonder why. So what did he do? He only went on to have a Hall of Fame career as a wide receiver. His stats are unbelievable. The catches he made were like, I'm looking at some of them now. He had for 3 years. Wow. Geez, man. I only went to 2019. He's been over 100 receptions from 2000. Is that, oh my gosh. That's from like 2012 to 2019. He had 100 receptions every year. That's insane. Now, some of that was him. I got to get my 5 catches and blah, blah, blah yards. So that might be a little inflated, but that's still pretty impressive. I mean, these aren't just like tipping the scales. Like these are 1 year was 101, but 110, 129, 136. You're at 100 passes, like 80 passes in a year is pretty good, but 100, that's impressive. So how did this all go awry? Well, this guy's had I know Ryan Clark didn't like him. He said they were going to offer him money, and he said, if you give him money, you're going to create a monster. And he said, him and Brown almost got in a fight, and he started saying things to Coach LeBeau, and he was screaming at Coach LeBeau and don't touch me, I'm the franchise, is what Brown said. Troy Polamalu didn't like him, and I guess it was the same incident. He got so mad at him, he said to wide receivers coach Scotty Montgomery, the receivers are live targets the rest of the period, so Troy wanted to start going and hitting Antonio Brown, for real. So, I mean, you pissed off Troy Polamalu. Ryan Clark, maybe, but Troy Polamalu, really? Come on.
We did an episode called The Goal That Saved the Penguins, and it was about a goal that Jaromir Jagr scored. that he and a bunch of other people think literally kept the team in town. So that's a really interesting story to go check out. But in that episode, we talked about a feud between Penguins winger Matthew Barnaby and future Penguin Lyle Odeline. The first round playoff opponent is the number 1 seed, and that's the New Jersey Devils. We mentioned the Devils before when we talked about the trap and this era of clutch and grab. No franchise perfected that style like the New Jersey Devils. They are the absolute powerhouse team of this era. Between 1995 and 2003, they win the Eastern Conference 4 different times, and they win the Stanley Cup 3 times. And so game 1 is in New Jersey, and the Devils win. It's a close game. The Penguins actually outshoot the Devils in game 1. But Brodeur makes some big saves. And then the series, like right off the bat, gets ugly. The Penguins had acquired Matthew Barnaby in a late season trade. Matthew Barnaby, Steve, how would you describe him? He's not a goon.
No, he's like one of those classic agitators. Like, he's not gonna he'll fight you, but that's not like, he's not like, like who Donald Brashear or like, Ty Domi, I already mentioned it. He's not like a fighter. He's more of like an instigator where he tries to get you to take a penalty. He'll do like little cross checks when they get in the glass and they put their glove up in the face, give them a face wash, like stuff like that, like stuff that's not necessarily a penalty. Sean Avery, perfect example. Like stand in front of, that was my favorite. Like was that Brodeur or Halunquist? That was Brodeur because he played for the Rangers. Yeah. And he stood. They remember the NHL had to change the rule the next day because he put his hand in front of Brodeur's face.
Yes. Yeah. No,
Sean Avery is probably a perfect example of that.
Yes, and if you remember Sean Avery, you're right. Matthew Barnaby was a very similar player to Avery.
He wasn't a goon. He wasn't a great player. He was like a mediocre player, but he would get under people's skin. Just do it, like I said, like literally putting your hand in front of Brodeur's face.
Right.
And you didn't know who to root for in that case. You're like,
Yeah, and Barnaby, so getting under the skin, he immediately ignites a feud with Devils defenseman Lyle Odeline. Actually, I should say reignites because that's actually a long-standing feud, Barnaby and Odeline from Barnaby's days in Buffalo. And he calls Odeline Cornelius. I've never seen Planet of the Apes, Steve, but apparently he thinks that
I don't know why you didn't go with Dr. Zayas. Did you ever remember The Simpsons had the musical version of Troy?
Honestly, that's my only Planet of the Apes reference.
Out of me.
And I already know the spoiler of how it ends. So
that's not how the movie ends.
No, I know.
But it's a great movie. You should really watch it. It's
I'll
the opposite of what the Troy McClure version is. Oh, I digress. So Cornelius was the young kid who was kind of naive. So
but he looks like an ape, right? Yeah, and so I guess
that was probably more of what I guess Matthew Barnaby was hinting at. Not that this guy was naive. I don't know.
Right. And so Odeline then is quoted as saying that Barnaby's wife Christina is, quote, god awful to look at. So
below the belt, yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're just taking like real personal shots at each other. So that kind of adds some fun to the series. Yeah, Matthew Barnaby really had the ability to get under people's skin, but I think the absolute king of psyching people out is Joey Porter. We could do a whole episode of just Joey Porter feuds, and in fact, we did do a whole episode about Jay Peasy, which we titled "Things to Do in Denver When You've Been Shot," the Joey Porter story. Steve, kudos to you. That was your title idea, I believe. Very creative. Yes,
it was.
One of Porter's most famous feuds started right before Super Bowl 40 after Seattle Seahawks tight end Jeremy Stevens answered a question about Jerome Bettis possibly playing his final ever game in his hometown of Detroit.
So, moving on, like that same season, Super Bowl 40, Jeremy Stevens. You remember what Jeremy Stevens exactly said? It was like, it's a nice story, but it's going to be sad when he loses or something like that.
It was very innocent. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
It wasn't like Jeremy Stevens was getting up there with the intent to trash talk or put the Steelers down. I mean, I don't think I don't think he meant anything by it. But
Yeah.
oh boy, did Joey Porter take it that way.
So, and Joey Porter, I guess some guys just need a reason to get fired up. Gets fired up, and he says, "I've been asleep all week, but now I got woke up." Porter said, "I've got my first taste of blood, and now I'm thirsty for more." So he wants to drink blood. Okay, what is he? Okay, Count Porter. Until now, it was watch what I say. I can't say this. I can't say that. Don't do anything silly, but I'm ready now. You look for the guys that say something that aren't supposed to say nothing, and I feel like he was definitely out of pocket to say what he said. I'm going to make sure he owns up to those words. So that was on Jeremy Stevens. He did have 3 tackles in the Super Bowl, so I don't remember. Did he have that? He had an okay Super Bowl, right? He didn't have great.
Well, it was less about how good of a Super Bowl Joey Porter had and more about how awful of a Super Bowl Jeremy Stevens had.
Jeremy Stevens dropped a pass on 4th and 1. I remember that. And I think he got a holding call too. Yeah.
Jeremy Stevens had a terrible game. He dropped several passes, key passes.
Yeah.
I think the one that iced the game, like where the Steelers took over on downs and took a knee.
Yeah.
I think that was a Jeremy Stevens drop. So, it was funny because in the Super Bowl DVD thing that year, Cowher said that Porter came to him. He's like, "I think you're going to be mad at me," and Cowher was like, "Oh no, what did you do?" And I remember that at the time. I was just kind of shaking my head. I'm like, "Oh man, we're in the Super Bowl. We don't need a distraction. This kind of stuff is stupid." And then Jeremy Stevens goes out there and just totally lays an egg. I mean, he was just awful. And the Seahawks had the best offense in the league that year, and he was a good tight end. And so it worked. It was amazing to me that worked. Just like it worked on the Colts several weeks earlier. Joey Porter he had the uncanny ability to do that. Every other player, you shake your head, you're like, "Don't do that. Don't give them motivation." Yeah. Remember, Anthony Smith with the Patriots.
Yeah,
what are you doing? Stop! Just shut your mouth. But for some reason, when Joey Porter did it, it got in people's heads, and sure enough, they win the Super Bowl, and Jeremy Stevens stinks. Our next feud is actually between 2 non-Pittsburgh groups of people. It's Wayne Gretzky versus the New Jersey Devils. So why would we talk about that feud?
You're a big Devils fan, aren't you, Tim?
Yeah, I'm a closet Devils fan, and I'm still bitter about Wayne Gretzky and that feud. No, we actually did an episode chronicling how the Penguins tanked the 1984 season so that they could draft a kid named Mario Lemieux. And the details behind that story are nothing short of insane. I mean, go listen to that episode if you haven't already, because it's a whale of a story. But even with all the stuff the Penguins did to try to lose, they still needed some outside help. And surprisingly, they got it courtesy of this feud between Gretzky and the Devils. Here's that story.
The Devils were probably just a real bad team. I don't think they were trying to lose. I think they were just bad. And there's even a website, we'll link it on our website, called hockeygraphs.com, that did a bunch of statistical analysis showing how the Devils were really just a bad team all season, but how the Penguins were statistically more of a middle of the pack team until that second half of the season, until that January back-to-back losses against the Devils and then the road trip to see Mario. After that point, they kind of show how the Penguins really went into the tank statistically, whereas the Devils were kind of more consistently bad all season. So even though they had just a putrid team that year, there's really not a lot of evidence that New Jersey tried to lose on purpose. And one guy that you could potentially thank for that, ironically, is Wayne Gretzky. So before we get to that story, just a little history on the Devils franchise. They begin play in 1975 as an expansion team called the Kansas City Scouts. And they're not very good. No one in Kansas City is coming to the game. So they moved to Denver and renamed themselves as the Colorado Rockies. But things don't go a whole lot better in Denver either. They move again. This time they move to East Rutherford, New Jersey, and they're renamed again as the Devils. And even that move is fraught with controversy because the other teams in that area, the Rangers, Islanders, and Flyers, don't want them there. And in fact, the Devils are forced to financially compensate those 3 other franchises for infringing on their territory. So in 1984, the New Jersey Devils are a very moribund NHL franchise. right? They never really had a home, and they're real bad. And there's a game way back at the very beginning of this season where the Devils are in Edmonton playing, as you mentioned, Steve, that dynasty Oiler team.
Yeah.
And as expected, they're just getting destroyed, right? And the final score of that game is 13-4. The Gretzky and the Oilers just destroy them. And you'd think Gretzky'd be happy about that. He has a hat trick in that game. He gets a pretty easy win. He can probably just kind of like relax the whole third period. But after the game, he's actually pretty pissed off because the New Jersey goaltender that night is a guy named Ron Lowe, who is a friend of Gretzky's and a former teammate. And after the game, Gretzky talks about how he feels sorry for Lowe. And he says this, quote, "It got to the point where it wasn't even funny. It's about time they got their act together. They're ruining the whole league. They better stop running a Mickey Mouse organization and put somebody on the ice." End quote.
Well, if anybody knows how to run a Mickey Mouse organization, it's Wayne Gretzky. Yeah, that's kind of ironic that he said that, and then look at the way he's run, like, the franchise's boy, karma.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was his comment after this blowout against the Devils that season. And that sets off just a huge firestorm in New Jersey. The fans are irate. The Devils come out and demand an apology, which Gretzky actually does, in fact, issue an apology for that statement. And when the Oilers come to New Jersey a few months later, the game is actually a sellout. And the fans all show up wearing Mickey Mouse ears just so they can boo Gretzky.
Are you really sure this isn't the Slapshot movie? Did they all just start fighting at the drop of the puck? Yeah, it's like, geez.
Well, and I just have to wonder, Steve, I mean, their pride took such a hit from that comment. Here you have the face of the league calling them a Mickey Mouse organization, and they're pushing back so hard against that narrative to the point where they're demanding apologies, and their fans are showing up for a sellout, which is probably rare for them that season. After all that, are they really going to tank the season, right? And prove Wayne Gretzky right? Like, you have to wonder if Gretzky hadn't made those comments, if they would have made the same decision midseason that the Penguins made.
You think it motivated them? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or if they tank, if they start losing on purpose, then Wayne Gretzky was right all along, and they are a Mickey Mouse organization.
Well,
and they came out and demanded he apologize, and he did. Like, they made a big stink about it. Like, we are not a Mickey Mouse. We try we're trying our best and everything. Like, at that point,
wonder why after the 9-2 win, he didn't call the Penguins a Mickey Mouse organization.
I think because, again, that's why I kind of gave that history about Kansas City and Denver, because their whole history was just fraught with, being an organization that never really stayed in one place, never really put a good product on the ice. I think at least the Penguins, like I said earlier, had some good teams before that. So maybe that's the context there for Gretzky saying all that. Also, the Penguins didn't have his buddy playing goaltender, so that also didn't help.
If they had Ron Lowe, yeah.
But I just think that's interesting. I just do. I wonder if Wayne Gretzky is responsible for the Penguins getting Mario Lemieux. It's an interesting thing to ponder.
Can you imagine playing Lemieux playing in New Jersey? That would have been interesting.
Thank God. He would have scored a lot of goals against the, Miami Penguins or wherever we would have moved to.
Miami Penguins win the Stanley Cup against Chicago.
Wish I could go back to the beginning of the season, put some money on the Penguins.
Yeah.
Recently, we did an episode about the 1990 Steelers and how they were brilliantly constructed by a guy named Tom Donahoe and then ultimately dismantled by a guy named Tom Donahoe.
I like the synergy there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. He had an ongoing and very well publicized feud with Bill Cowher. And one of the questions we asked in that episode is, where did this feud really originate? Also at this time, there's a rift starting to develop between Donahoe and Cowher. And no one really knows when it starts. Like those two guys haven't written tell-all books or anything like that. Ed Bouchette, who covered the Steelers for decades and probably has the most inside Steeler information of any Steeler media person, he says things were good for about 2 years, but then started like very slowly deteriorating. The Steelers win the division in 1996, even though they had lost a bunch of players, and that was, we did a whole episode on that season as well. And they kind of unfortunately limp into the postseason. And they lose in the Fog Bowl game in the playoffs in Foxborough to the aforementioned New England Patriots. And the day after the game, two reporters approached Tom Donahoe asking about the game, and he makes this quote. He says, "It was a very disappointing game, obviously. It's probably not reflective of the team we have. For whatever reasons, we didn't play very well. We were flat." End quote. And that causes a big stir. When Cowher hears about that, he's furious. The next day at a news conference, someone asks Cowher about it, and he very tersely says something to the effect of, "I don't know, ask Tom."
Tears? Was he tears? Cowher used to say tears.
Yeah, right. So that kind of seems to be the first public display of there being a rift. And again, nobody really knows how bad this rift is at the time, but you can tell that Cowher's angry, and the Donahoe said they were flat because they got blown out in that Fog Bowl game.
Yeah, it wasn't even a game. Like the second play of the game, Curtis Martin goes for like 60 yards or something.
Yeah, it was bad. We did an episode on Pittsburgh sports conspiracy theories, and one of the theories we delved into in that episode was, did Joe Paterno kill the Penn State rivalry because of a feud he had with Pitt? Because that's what a lot of people think happened.
Yes, that's what happened. Truth.
and so spoilers, we dived into that here.
Here's a good one. Penn State and Joe Paterno wouldn't play Pitt because of revenge for not joining a conference with them. So I actually was able to find a UPI article from 1981. Hey, look at me, Tim. I put on my little reporter's hat and was like, "Hey, Sonny, get me the article from 1981." So it was Pitt and Penn State are in talks to make an all-Eastern conference. Pitt has been very active in making things happen. Paterno told a group of reporters last month at a state college hotel. They are excited about the possibility of an Eastern Conference. Pitt attended every meeting, said Casal, the athletic director at Temple. We thought they were gung-ho for a full conference concept. But all the time and planning went out the window Wednesday when the Pitt administration, in all their wisdom, and I added that, announced the university would join the Big East for the 3 years, beginning with the 1982-83. And that killed the Eastern League before it could get off the ground. The defection of Pitt, which is nationally known football program, this is 1981, Tim. So we were nationally known back then, and big city exposure would have put a viability of a new all-sports conference on the critical list. So they were under, when we knew the Big East was courting them, this guy said, but we under the impression that Pitt had turned them down. Also, Dave Wannstedt had said he had talked to Joe Paterno. Paterno had no interest in reviving the Pitt-Penn State rivalry, even though Wannstedt had telephoned them about it when both were still coaching. He said, "Dave, tell Jeff Long I have no problem with Jeff, but here's the deal. As long as I'm here, it's just not going to work out," Wannstedt said, recalling his conversation with Paterno. Why and how, I really don't know, Wannstedt said, and didn't ask and didn't care. Gotta love Dave. I gave this a tinfoil hat rating of 2. It's probably, I think it's true more than false. I didn't give it a full 1 because it's still kind of murky out there who did what and to whom. Probably is a revenge move by Paterno for not going along with them in the conference in the early 1980s. And it maybe was best for Pitt considering all the baggage Penn State has now. And once again, we're just talking about how they were splitting the market. If Pitt and Penn State would have tried to, join the Big Ten eventually, let's say all those eventually they would have had to try to join the Big Ten or something, right? If you look in your crystal ball. But talk about a what if episode, huh? They would have had trouble. I think that's one of the reasons Pitt has never been invited to the Big Ten is because once again, the UConn thing. Like, why does Penn State want to split its territory with Pitt?
Yeah, and it was interesting. There was Pitt that blew up that Eastern Conference. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. Penn State's always been arrogant and petty. That's two things you can always say about the Penn State football program, and
that fits both of those categories.
It does, and when they killed when the rivalry was killed, at one point Paterno said, I remember correctly, he would only do it if Pitt played there 2 out of every 3 years,
something like that. It was like a 2-1 or 3-1 or something stupid.
Yeah, and that just reeks of I'm still mad at you for something that happened in 1981.
He made that's called a bad faith offer. You make an offer that
right.
The other party won't ever accept.
Right. But the way that the way Penn State always talked about it for years was just, we play who we play, and they just pretended like there was no history, there was no desire for it. It was just another school. Right. And it was just super arrogant. I always hated that mentality. Tim Curley, who was their athletic director, who ended up going to prison because of said arrogance, he used to do that all the time. Yeah, you put Pittsburgh, sure, whatever. I don't really, where's that at again? I mean, that was their attitude. And I think it probably was. I think Paterno was offended, and maybe Pitt made the wrong call there. I don't know. But I think that was all based in arrogance and pettiness.
I think Pitt made the short-sighted call.
Yeah.
Like, they saw money on the table and like, well, this gets our basketball team into a conference and our football team will be just fine. And
again,
and they did not see like Paterno correctly assessed that everything was going to go to major conferences for the next 20 to 30 years.
Right.
Whereas
and Pitt was, like you said,
it was just like, hey, look at us. We got a winning football team for the first time in 40 years. Yay.
Yeah. Pitt was such a big draw at the time. They never could have foreseen. So if I guess it's a fair point. If Paterno was upset about it, he probably had a right to be upset about it. Right. So I'll give him that. I think, that part makes sense. But to kill a rivalry that so many people in this area grew up on and loved because you're bitter about something, that's just, anyway, I have a lot of negative things to say about Penn State football, so I'm just going to stop. All right, our last feud can be titled Myron Cope versus the people of San Francisco.
The whole town, huh?
The whole town. Myron.
He didn't like cable cars, rice-a-roni, or...
Yeah, Myron wasn't just going to get into a feud with one person. He was too big of a personality for that.
That Bay can go suck it. The Golden Gate Bridge, Fort Pitt Bridge is better than the Golden Gate Bridge.
This came from an episode we did called "The Surprising History of Steelers versus 49ers," and in which we went into some really interesting history between these two kind of like flagship NFL franchises, the Steelers and the Niners. Two franchises that obviously have had a ton of success over the years, but who traditionally don't play each other very often. So you wouldn't think there's a lot of history, but there actually is. And one of the things we talked about was this incident in which Steelers broadcaster Myron Cope took some shots at the citizens of San Francisco. So let's fast forward to November 27th, 1978. The Steelers are in San Francisco to play the 49ers on Monday Night Football, which at that time was a big deal, right? Monday Night Football was the game of the week. Yep. But unfortunately, some very tragic events unfold in San Francisco earlier that afternoon. One person, Steve, I know for sure we have not talked about on this podcast, is a woman named Dianne Feinstein. Do you know who Dianne Feinstein is?
Di-Fi, still serving member of Congress, I do believe.
Yes, at age 146. Very impressive.
She voted for Lincoln.
Well, back in 1978, she is the president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and she's tasked with having to make this very unfortunate announcement to the press.
President of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed. The
Way to be professional, press corps.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was pretty shocking. And the mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, and city supervisor Harvey Milk, both assassinated by their coworker, city supervisor Dan Brown. There's a whole
It leads to the Twinkie defense.
the Twinkie defense. Absolutely, yes.
It's like the Chewbacca defense. It's undefensible. You can't.
Yeah, I knew you would know that story, Steve, because you're the history buff. I think they made a movie about that with, I want to say, Sean Penn.
That was about Harvey Milk.
Oh, that wasn't about the assassination. It was about.
Yeah, it was about
Okay.
it. And he was not killed because of any sexual preference he had. He was killed because the guy was ticked off that he lost his job.
Right.
Now, maybe it played a factor in it. I don't know, but I always thought it was more just workplace violence.
Yeah, whole interesting story behind that, and then the subsequent trial and conviction that a lot of people thought was way too soft because of the Twinkie.
Yeah,
defense.
it's like, he said he ate too many Twinkies, and
Right.
Yeah.
And he was like insane because of it.
Yeah.
So obviously the murder of two city officials is a pretty dark day for the city of San Francisco. And the question arises, hey, should we really be playing this game at Candlestick Park tonight? Candlestick was publicly owned and operated by the city, specifically by the San Francisco Parks and Recreation Commission. And they sent a telegram to the NFL and to Art Rooney and to Niners owner Eddie DeBartolo Jr. I did not know people still sent telegrams in 1978, but apparently they did. And
It's coming over the wire, Mr. Rooney.
and what the Parks and Rec Commission said is, it is our strong belief that the use of a city-owned facility this evening for a sporting event is inappropriate, would be in poor taste. So they're asking the league to cancel the game. There's also concern that, because this was a politically charged kind of assassination, that there could be protests or riots, and would it really be a good idea to divert a bunch of city resources to a football game? But the NFL says, you know what? We played when Kennedy was shot. We're not going to cancel for your mayor. So
NFL's a bunch of jerks. No.
Yeah, we're playing the game. Stop.
Yeah.
Too bad. Stop. May he rest in peace. Stop. So yeah,
We'll give
that's
a moment of silence before the game.
well, funny that you say that, because before the game, they actually do hold a moment of silence at Candlestick Park. It's very awkward because it's like dead quiet in the stadium, but then there's like a handful of people just yelling out swear words and stuff during this moment of silence. And you can very audibly hear them during the broadcast. I can't play it because we're a PG podcast and there's a lot of non-PG words that people are screaming out. So I can't play that. But what I can play for you is the reaction of Steelers broadcasters Myron Cope and Jack Fleming to that. Take a listen.
Moment of silence observed in memory of the late mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, and the city supervisor, Harvey Milk.
How do you like the cuckoos in the crowd?
Oh,
They're observing a moment of silence, and they're, I don't know, a handful of voices out there at the top of their lungs shouting obscenities and whatnot during the moment of silence. But I guess there are proportionately more cuckoos in this town than elsewhere. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't want to say that, but Myron, if you didn't have him, you'd think the human race was suddenly becoming just too perfect.
Well,
You're just unbelievable.
that's terrible.
Oh,
you
it's
know,
terrible.
that's
It's absolutely unbelievable, but here it is, particularly in San Francisco. You get that kind of reaction. Paul Holfer is going deep for the 49ers.
Wow. And to the game. Wow. I mean, gotta love Myron calling it how it is. I mean, that's ridiculous. Like I don't even understand. Weren't both those guys popular? They were popularly elected. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they weren't popular back in the 70s. I don't know. It's just odd that why would you do that?
I don't even know that it was like people were upset because of the moment of silence was for those two guys, or it was just it's quiet, and so if I yell out something, then everybody will hear it, right? just somebody being a jerk. I feel like that rant from Myron Cope would cause more controversy today with
They
him just
deserved
kind
it.
of.
I'm sorry, they deserved it. What, you're going to defend people yelling during a moment?
No,
of
but then
silence?
he kind of like labels the whole entire city of San Francisco as disrespectful nut jobs. I feel like that part would have garnered a little bit of controversy, but again,
Well,
back
stop
then,
yelling during the moment of silence. Just hey, perfectly within your control. Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, for sure, criticize that, but then the kind of him and Fleming insinuating that, that's what you get in a place like San Francisco. I think that part would have rankled a few feathers. All right, everybody, that's our episode on Feuds. Thank you so much for listening. Please check us out on Facebook or on Twitter or on our website. You can also email the show. You can text the show from the link in the show notes. Thank you once again, everybody. Really appreciate you listening. We really appreciate you spreading the word about our little show here. And we'll catch you next time.